Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Book summary. Setting and opening. The novel opens with Austen's famous epigram. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This sets the tone: marriage, money, social expectations. The scene is rural England, primarily Hertfordshire, about 50 miles from London, and locations like the village of Meryton, the Bennet home at Longbourn, the nearby estates such as Netherfield Park, and later Darcy's estate at Pemberley in Derbyshire. When the wealthy bachelor Charles Bingley takes up residence at Netherfield Park, excitement ripples through the neighborhood, especially the Bennet household, where Mrs. Bennet is eager to see one of her 5 daughters married to him. The Bennet family: Mr. Bennet wry, sarcastic, somewhat detached; Mrs. Bennet nervous, marriage-obsessed, social climbing; and their 5 daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Lizzie, Mary, Kitty, Lydia. Each daughter has distinct traits. Jane is gentle and pretty, Elizabeth sharp and playful, Mary bookish and solemn, Kitty and Lydia more frivolous. Mr. Bennet's estate is entailed away from the female line, meaning he cannot leave Longbourn to any daughter. That social and economic dynamic weighs heavily across the story. Inheritance, security, marriage. Early developments: Netherfield, Bingley, Darcy, and the Bennets at a social event. A ball. Bingley is warm, open, and dances frequently with Jane Bennet. He is immediately taken with her. Meanwhile, his friend Fitzwilliam Darcy is less enthusiastic. He dismisses the setting, despises what he sees as the inferior manners of the local society, and publicly refuses to dance with Elizabeth. His aloofness and proud demeanor mark him as haughty and off-putting to the Bennets and the neighborhood. Nevertheless, as the narrative unfolds, Darcy finds himself increasingly aware of Elizabeth's intelligence, wit, and vivacity, a challenge to his assumptions and to social expectation. Meanwhile, Jane and Bingley's connection deepens. Jane is modest, kind, slow to suspect ill, which Bingley admires. The stage is set: attraction, but also social obstacles, misunderstandings, and inner barriers. One afternoon, Jane goes to visit Netherfield. On the way, she is caught in a sudden downpour and falls ill when she arrives at Bingley's home. Elizabeth insists on walking over the muddy fields to visit her sister, arriving in a state of muddied dress. She thereby exposes various social contrasts: her unpretentiousness, her disregard for genteel appearance, and the snobbish responses of Bingley's sister, Caroline Bingley, who also secretly desires Darcy for herself. Caroline's disdain for Elizabeth and the Bennet family's lesser status adds tension. When Elizabeth and Jane eventually return home, new characters arrive: Mr. Collins, a pompous, obsequious clergyman, and the Bennet's cousin, who stands to inherit Longbourn when Mr. Bennet dies because of the entail. This relationship introduces familial obligation, social expectation, and the pressure to marry well. Mr. Collins courts Elizabeth, but she refuses him, wounding his pride and incurring Mrs. Bennet's rage at losing the match. This refusal is a key moment in Elizabeth's moral and personal independence. She will not accept a marriage purely for security or social advantage. Also enters the charming and handsome soldier George Wickham. He captivates Elizabeth with a story of how Darcy mistreated him, denying him a promised inheritance. Elizabeth, partly prejudiced already against Darcy, readily believes Wickham, and this further colors her views on Darcy's character. The winter separation shifts in fortune and character as winter deepens. Bingley and Darcy abruptly leave Netherfield and return to London. This leaves Jane disappointed and uneasy among the Bennets about the future of her prospects. Meanwhile, Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's pragmatic friend, accepts Mr. Collins's proposal, surprising Elizabeth, who sees it as a compromise of affection for security. Charlotte's decision introduces another angle: marriage as social necessity rather than romantic ideal. Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her new home, which lies near Lady Catherine de Bourgh's estate. Lady Catherine is Darcy's formidable aunt. The landscape of social power is thereby expanded. Elizabeth occasionally meets Darcy during his visits to his aunt. There is a growing tension between attraction and social barrier. One day Darcy makes a shocking proposal to Elizabeth. He expresses his interest in her, despite her lesser rank and the known improprieties of her family. Elizabeth, taken aback, tells him frankly that she cannot accept. She accuses him of arrogance, of separating Bingley from Jane, and of treating Wickham unjustly. Darcy is stung and departs. The next morning Darcy gives Elizabeth a long letter. In it he explains his actions. Yes, he did discourage Bingley from attaching himself to Jane, because he believed Jane's feelings were not deep enough and because he believed the Bennet family to be socially inferior. He also reveals the truth about Wickham, that Wickham accepted a large sum from Darcy as father, but mismanaged it, and later attempted to elope with Darcy's sister Georgiana for her fortune. Elizabeth reads the letter and finds that her prejudices and first impressions have misled her. She begins to question her judgments and sees Darcy in a new light. This turning point marks much of the novel's moral center, Elizabeth's self-reflection, the movement from prejudice to understanding, and Darcy's from pride toward humility. The visit to Pemberley, Lydia's escapade and social crisis in spring, Elizabeth goes on a journey with her aunt and uncle, the Gardiners. The itinerary takes them to the north of England and to the neighborhood of Pemberley, Darcy's estate. The house, gardens, estate staff, and the manner of its master astonish Elizabeth. Darcy's taste, benevolence toward his tenants, and the regard of his servants all speak to a better character than she had assumed. Unexpectedly Darcy arrives, greets the Gardiners with warmth, invites Elizabeth and the Gardiners to dine, treats her with politeness. Elizabeth is impressed. Back home, an urgent letter arrives. Elizabeth's youngest sister, Lydia, has eloped with Wickham, gone to Brighton with no chaperone, no arrangement, apparently disgraceful. The Bennet family is thrown into panic. Lydia's immature impulsiveness threatens the marriages and reputations of all her sisters, especially given the entail and the pressure of social precedents. Mr. Gardiner and Mr. Bennet search for Lydia. Hope seems lost. Then a letter comes. Lydia and Wickham are discovered. They have been married, though Wickham was induced with money to do so. Rumor is that Darcy paid off Wickham and ensured the marriage. Elizabeth learns of Darcy's unspoken intervention. This act of generosity, his secret assistance, further repositions Darcy in Elizabeth's view. Meanwhile, Bingley returns to Netherfield, renews his attentions to Jane, and soon proposes. Jane accepts. Lady Catherine de Bourgh then visits Longbourn, having heard a rumor that Darcy intends to propose to Elizabeth. She confronts Elizabeth, demands that she promise never to accept such a proposal because the Bennet family is socially inferior and unfit for Darcy. Elizabeth refuses categorically. She will not promise to give up her happiness. This boldness shocks Lady Catherine and drives Elizabeth's shift. She now recognizes her own worth and the genuine regard Darcy has for her. Shortly after, Darcy visits Elizabeth. This time his demeanor is humble, affectionate, sincere. He proposes again, and this time Elizabeth accepts, and they both are resolved to build their marriage on mutual respect, love, and improved self-knowledge. The novel ends with both Jane and Elizabeth married, the social circle coming full circle, but changed. Themes, motifs, and character inside. Pride and Prejudice. The title itself encapsulates the main conflict, Darcy's pride in his social standing and Elizabeth's prejudice against him interfere with their happiness. They must each adjust. Darcy must lower his social snobbery. Elizabeth must moderate her quick judgments. Class, inheritance, and marriage, the entail on Longbourn. The social expectations for marriage. The importance of fortune. A single man in possession of a good fortune all reflect the economic and social pressures on women and men in the Regency era. The importance of character and virtue. The novel contrasts superficial behavior, e.g. Mrs. Bennet's frantic marriage mania, Lydia's flirtatiousness, Caroline Bingley's social ambitions, with genuine moral worth, e.g. Elizabeth's integrity, Darcy's latent kindness, Jane's constancy, self-knowledge and growth, Elizabeth's intelligence and wit are accompanied by a capacity to change. Darcy's transformation, for instance, his generosity and humility, showcases the value of self-reflection. Family and society. The novel explores how individual choices are shaped by family dynamics, social expectations, and community judgment. The Bennet situation, 5 daughters, an entail. Social vulnerability is not simply personal but social. Setting as character. Estates like Netherfield and Pemberley do more than provide backdrop, they reflect the characters. Pemberley, especially, becomes a tangible representation of Darcy's world, his responsibilities, his taste, and Elizabeth's changing view of him. Plot elements, selected scenes, and their significance. When Elizabeth arrives muddy at Netherfield, the contrast of her impromptu walk and the pristine drawing room of Bingley's sister highlights class and social sensibility. It also shows Elizabeth's good humor and unaffectedness, qualities Darcy later admires. Darcy's first proposal, surprising because of his frank admission of love, yet his highlight of the social differences. He says he has struggled with the inferiority of her situation, which offends Elizabeth. In her refusal, she lists his perceived wrongs, his separation of Bingley from Jane, his treatment of Wickham, his arrogance. The famous letter, Darcy's defense, is not merely explanation but evidence. It shifts Elizabeth's internal narrative. This device is key. Austen uses epistolary form to allow self-reflection. Lydia and Wickham, their elopement, is the climax of social crisis. It threatens to ruin the family's reputation and pulls together many of the novel's strands: money, marriage, rank, female vulnerability, male responsibility. Darcy's secret rescue of Lydia gives him moral credit and cements Elizabeth's esteem. The visit to Pemberley. This tour allows Elizabeth and the reader to see Darcy's world. The housekeeper's praise, Georgiana's shy affection, the estate's orderliness all help shift Elizabeth's view. Lady Catherine's confrontation. This scene allows Elizabeth to assert her self-respect publicly. It also forces Darcy's hand, giving him cause to propose again. The final engagements. Jane and Bingley, followed by Elizabeth and Darcy. They represent the two paths to marriage in the novel, one more straightforward, one more troubled, but ultimately richer in moral growth. In Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen marries romantic narrative with social critique. The story of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy is not just a love story but a vision of how individuals may transcend social barriers and prejudices. Through self-knowledge, humility, and emotional honesty, the novel remains compelling because these themes are enduring and because Austen's characters are vivid. Her social eye unflinching and her wit sharp. Analysis. The plot of Pride and Prejudice follows a linear chronological structure. Elizabeth Bennet is the protagonist, and the major conflict revolves around her struggle to find a compatible husband despite the obstacles presented by both social conventions and her own lack of self-awareness. She encounters a number of antagonists who create obstacles between her and a happy marriage. These antagonists can be classified into two groups. The first are the characters who threaten Elizabeth's future happiness by trying to persuade her to marry the wrong man. They include Mrs. Bennet, who does not understand the kind of marriage her daughter wants and thinks Elizabeth should lower her standards, and Mr. Collins, who tries to convince Elizabeth to accept a marriage that would never satisfy her. The second group of antagonists are the characters who try to prevent Elizabeth's marriage to Darcy, notably Miss Bingley and Lady Catherine de Bourgh. There are times when Elizabeth functions as her own antagonist, her stubbornness and inability to understand that Darcy would be a good match for her move her further away from her goal of happiness rather than toward it. The main plot of Elizabeth's path to marriage intersects closely with subplots focused on the love lives of other female characters. The plot structure is also shaped by its division into volumes. Pride and Prejudice was initially published in 3 volumes. In the first volume, the initial events of the plot focus on Jane's attraction to Bingley, with Elizabeth's interactions with Darcy and his gradual attraction to her functioning as secondary incidents. The major conflict in this first section of the novel centers on whether Jane and Bingley will be able to marry. Since Darcy and Bingley's sisters seem determined to keep them apart, another conflict arises when Mr. Collins begins pursuing Elizabeth, and she is forced to reject him. These 2 initial conflicts are given some resolution at the end of the first volume, when Mr. Collins finally accepts defeat and marries Charlotte Lucas, and the Bingley family leaves Netherfield to return to London. This moment in the plot marks a low point, as it appears as though neither Bennet sister has much chance of getting married, and that most people marry for money and status. The plot rises again with a new focus on the possibility of a match between Elizabeth and Darcy. Elizabeth's visit to Charlotte and Mr. Collins creates a new opportunity for her to interact with Mr. Darcy, leading him to propose to her. This proposal occurs approximately in the middle of the story and represents the climax of the attraction Darcy has been trying to resist ever since he first met Elizabeth. Her rejection of his proposal parallels her previous rejection of Murdoch Collins. At this point, Elizabeth believes that Darcy is a bad person, and she will not accept a marriage to a man she does not love, no matter what he might offer her. However, the plot line of Darcy and Elizabeth's relationship increases in intensity after she rejects him. The rejected proposal leads him to reveal new information that makes her question her perception of him. The unfolding plot of growing affection between Darcy and Elizabeth is interrupted by a new conflict, Lydia's elopement. This conflict dominates the novel's plot until its resolution. Once Lydia's plotline is resolved with her respectable marriage, the focus shifts to a return to Jane's storyline. Reunited with Bingley, she quickly becomes engaged, resolving the conflict that has been ongoing since the novel's start. All that remains is a final conflict to be overcome in the form of Lady de Bourgh's attempt to prevent Elizabeth from marrying Darcy. The earlier plot events where Elizabeth stood her ground have prepared her for this moment, and she refuses to back down. With the characters having finally overcome all the obstacles in their way, the novel's climax takes place when Darcy proposes a second time, and Elizabeth accepts him. The climax is followed by some brief falling action, including the preparations for the marriage and the projected futures for all 3 couples. Pride and Prejudice was influential in demonstrating that everyday events and domestic struggles presented in a realistic way can be as interesting as more sensational stories. Readers experience the events of the plot in the same way the characters do, without any special narrative techniques. This choice of plot structure helps to make the events of the novel relatable. The novel closes with a classic comedic ending in which 3 of the Bennet sisters are married, and the virtuous characters Jane, Elizabeth, Bingley, and Darcy are rewarded with prosperity and happiness, while the foolish or wicked characters Lydia and Wickham face a more turbulent existence. Irony, domestic realism, and the critique of class and gender constraint in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice 1813 stands as one of the most enduring novels in English literature, not only for its romance, but also for its sharp irony, vivid domestic realism, and incisive social critique. Beneath its witty dialogue and elegant manners, Austen offers a profound examination of class, gender, and moral judgment in early 19th century England. Through her ironic narrative voice, the realistic depiction of domestic life, and the nuanced portrayal of women's limited social roles, Austen exposes the constraints of her society while affirming the possibility of moral growth and personal integrity within it. Irony as Austen's moral and social lens. Irony is Austen's chief instrument of critique and her hallmark as a novelist. From the famous opening line, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife," Austen sets her tone of playful skepticism. The sentence sounds like a truism, but it is immediately undercut by irony. It is not the rich man but the surrounding families who are in want of him. The humor exposes the materialistic marriage market that dominates the novel's social world. Throughout the novel, Austen uses irony to reveal moral blindness and self-deception. Elizabeth Bennet's pride in her discernment blinds her to Darcy's real character, just as Darcy's pride in his class blinds him to Elizabeth's worth. Their initial judgments of one another are both ironic reversals. Elizabeth accuses Darcy of arrogance, but later discovers her own prejudice. Darcy condemns her family's impropriety but learns humility and respect. When Elizabeth later declares, "Till this moment, I never knew myself," Austen delivers both the emotional and ironic climax of Elizabeth's moral education. Irony also governs Austen's narrative voice. The narrator often seems to endorse society's conventions only to subtly expose their absurdity. For instance, when Mr. Collins is described as a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, self-importance, and humility, Austen's ironic phrasing ridicules the very qualities prized in a man of good fortune within the marriage system. Irony, therefore, becomes Austen's moral microscope. It enables readers to perceive hypocrisy beneath manners and to recognize virtue where convention refuses to see it. Domestic realism, the everyday world of emotion and morality. Austen's realism is not the sweeping social panorama of Dickens or Fielding, yet his domestic realism focused on the drawing room, the dinner table, and the marriage proposal. Yet within this limited sphere, Austen achieves extraordinary moral and emotional depth. Pride and Prejudice unfolds almost entirely within a small provincial community: Longbourn, Meryton, Netherfield, and Pemberley. Austen's attention to domestic detail, letters, visits, dances, meals, reflects the daily rhythms of middle-class life. These seemingly trivial events become moral testing grounds. For example, the Netherfield ball functions as a microcosm of the novel's social world. Manners, Pride, and Prejudice collide as Mrs. Bennet's vulgarity embarrasses Elizabeth, Darcy's reserve is misread as arrogance, and the contrast between Bingley's amiability and Darcy's stiffness is publicly staged. Austen's domestic scenes also highlight female intelligence and moral agency within confined settings. Elizabeth's conversations with Darcy, Lady Catherine, and Mr. Collins reveal her independence of mind. Her refusal of Mr. Collins's pompous proposal, "You could not make me happy, and I am the last woman in the world who could make you so," demonstrates both self-knowledge and resistance to social pressure. Within the domestic sphere, Austen turns dialogue into moral action. Elizabeth's words are as decisive as any heroic deed in an epic. Even the Pemberley episode blends realism with moral symbolism. Elizabeth's first visit to Darcy's estate offers a moment of revelation. The physical order and taste of Pemberley nearer Darcy's true character: noble, restrained, and genuine. Austen's realist description: "It was a large, handsome, stone building, standing well on rising ground," is not decorative but ethical. The domestic setting becomes the language through which moral worth is revealed. Critique of class and gender constraint. Beneath its wit and domestic surface, Pride and Prejudice is a subtle but powerful critique of the rigid class system and gender inequality of Austen's England. Women's lives are defined by economic dependence and social reputation. The Bennet sisters' situation dramatizes this. With no male heir to inherit Longbourn, their future depends on marrying well. Mrs. Bennet's obsession with securing husbands for her daughters, though comic, is also desperate realism. As Charlotte Lucas observes with bleak clarity, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. Her decision to marry Mr. Collins solely from the pure and disinterested desire of an establishment exposes how social constraint forces intelligent women into emotional compromise. Austen does not romanticize female subordination. She exposes its cruelty through irony and contrast. Charlotte's practicality, Lydia's recklessness, and Elizabeth's independence form a spectrum of female responses to gender limitation. Elizabeth's refusal of both Mr. Collins and initially of Darcy is radical for her time, a declaration that self-respect outweighs financial security. When she tells Lady Catherine, "He is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter, so far we are equal," she asserts moral and personal equality in defiance of class hierarchy. Austen's tone here is proud but principled than early feminist assertion of woman's dignity within patriarchy. Similarly, Austen critiques class arrogance through characters like Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose bullying sense of superiority epitomizes inherited privilege. Her outrage at Elizabeth's presumed engagement, "Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?" reveals how class prejudice disguises itself as moral concern. In contrast, Darcy's eventual humility and self-knowledge signify a rejection of class pride. When he tells Elizabeth, "You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you, I was properly humbled." Austen aligns moral worth not with birth but with ethical growth and emotional intelligence. Through such transformations, the novel proposes a quiet social revolution. The true basis of worth is character, not class; sincerity, not wealth; mutual respect, not dominance; irony, realism, and moral vision united. Austen's genius lies in uniting her ironic wit, realistic observation, and social critique into a single moral vision. Her irony exposes folly without cynicism. Her domestic realism grounds ethical inquiry in everyday life. Her critique of class and gender invites reform through reason and self-awareness rather than rebellion. The union of Elizabeth and Darcy at the novel's end embodies this moral balance. Their marriage is not a fairy tale triumph but a moral resolution. Both have learned humility, emotional insight, and respect across class boundaries. It represents Austen's ideal of companionate marriage, founded on equality of mind and feeling, a radical ideal in a society that treated marriage as a transaction. Even the comic subplots reinforce Austen's themes. The foolishness of Mr. Collins, the frivolity of Lydia, and the vanity of Lady Catherine are not just satire but moral contrasts that throw Elizabeth's intelligence into relief. Through irony, Austen restores moral order to the domestic world, an order based not on wealth or title but on mutual understanding and emotional truth.